Slow you down. Slow you down.
Slow you down.
Didn't you notice? I got sweatbands.
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 I don't have sweatbands. Sweatbands. No sweatbands. Why do you need a sweatband? It's only 50 degrees.
50 degrees.
Hey, Mark. Get set. Sweatbands. Sweatbands.
Eric, I've got your meal.
Sweatbands. Hey, Eric.
Sweatbands.
I don't have sweatbands.
Sweatbands. Sweatbands.
I've got your meal. Feel.
Sweatbands.
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 I've got your meal.
Sweatbands.
Sweatbands.
It's only 50 degrees.
Sweat.
I don't have sweatbands. Sweatbands.
Didn't you notice? I got sweat.
No sweat.
Didn't you notice? I've got sweat.
Sweat.
Bands.
Bands.
It's only 50
Sweatbands.